Is it just me, or are there other people here that are a little bit disappointed with democracy?
Wow. What an enthusiastic response. So, this is going to be an argument against democracy. Well, I will defer to Winston Churchill when he said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others." But, all right, I am ready to be educated. Tell me, what is better than democracy?
So let's look at a few numbers. If we look across the world, the median turnout in presidential elections over the last 30 years has been just 67%. Now, if we go to Europe and we look at people that participated in EU parliamentary elections, the median turnout in those elections is just 42%. Now, let's go to New York and let's see how many people voted in the last election for mayor. And we will find that only 24% of people showed up to vote. What that means is that if Friends was still running, Joey and maybe Phoebe would have shown up to vote. And you cannot blame them because
choosing not to vote is as much an expression of one's personal liberties as choosing to vote?
Because people are tired of politicians, and people are tired of other people using the data that they have generated to communicate with their friends and family to target political propaganda at them.
Wait. People are not voting because of Facebook. Political posts on Facebook are making people less likely to vote. Then please do tell me, if the last mayoral election in New York City saw a 24% turnout because of things like Facebook, then why is it in 2005, when Facebook was barely a blip on anyone's radar, was the mayoral turnout 16%? Did social media travel back in time to discourage voting that year?
But the thing about this is that this is not new. Nowadays, people use likes to target propaganda at you before they use your zip code or your gender or your age. Because the idea of targeting people with propaganda for political purpose is as old as politics.
So, as you said,
this is not new.
And then, so what?
And the reason why that idea is there is because democracy has a basic vulnerability. This is the idea of a representative. In principle, democracy is the ability of people to exert power. But in practice, we have to delegate that power to a representative that can exert that power for us.
Yes. Which is why, in America at least, we don't actually operate as a democracy, but as a representative republic. A lot of people don't seem to understand the difference between the two. But the principles of democracy are at the heart of our political processes, regardless. Sorry, I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent there. What were you saying?
That representative is a bottleneck or a weak spot. It is the place that you want to target if you want to attack democracy. Because you can capture democracy by either capturing that representative or capturing the way that people choose it. So the big question is this the end of history? Is this the best that we can do? Or actually, are there alternatives?
Is this the end of history, or are there alternatives? Well, this is the end of history. Right now. And right now. And right now. Because every second that has passed becomes the current end of history. Yeah, I know, I'm being a smartass. But then, I have no idea how having political representatives constitutes the end of history in the first place. Unless we're back to time-traveling social media?
Some people have been thinking about alternatives, and one of the ideas that is out there is the idea of direct democracy.
Which would be disastrous in the United States, as those areas of the country with the most people would end up making all of the decisions for the rest of the country. And we are a collection of states, each of which has its own realm of sovereignty, and the inhabitants of which all have a right to be heard in our government via the balancing mechanisms of political representation and the Electoral College. Oh, but sorry, I'm going off on a tangent again. You were saying?
This is the idea of bypassing politicians completely and having people vote directly on issues, having people vote directly on bills. But this idea is naive because there's too many things that we would need to choose. If you look at the 114th US Congress, you would have seen that the House of Representatives considered more than 6,000 bills, the Senate considered more than 3,000 bills, and they approved more than 300 laws. Those would be many decisions that each person would have to make a week on topics that they know little about. So there's a big cognitive bandwidth problem if we're going to try to think about direct democracy as a viable alternative.
That is also a very good point. So, direct democracy isn't a reasonable answer then. Got it.
So some people think about the idea of liquid democracy or fluid democracy, which is the idea that you endorse your political power to someone that can endorse it to someone else, and eventually you create a large follower network in which at the end there's a few people that are making decisions on behalf of all of their followers and their followers.
People who represent other people. But that's what we already have. But you said representing their followers? So, democracy via Instagram? Yeah, I've never heard of the term liquid democracy before, so I am probably missing something. But then, I'm pretty sure we're about to be told that it isn't a viable option anyway.
But this idea also doesn't solve the problem of the cognitive bandwidth, and to be honest, it's also quite similar to the idea of having a representative.
Yes. So, you bring up a theory that I've never heard of before just to shoot it down because it's too similar to the theory that you're already opposed to. Got it.
So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be a little bit provocative, and I'm going to ask you, well, what if instead of trying to bypass politicians, we try to automate them?
Okay, the footage of the woman on the loom is not my insertion. That is part of the original video. All the same, as suddenly as it popped in, I couldn't help but laugh like it was meant to be some kind of a stinger. So, anyway, you want to automate politicians. I cannot wait to hear this proposal.
The idea of automation is not new. It started more than 300 years ago when French weavers decided to automate the loom. The winner of that industrial war was Joseph-Marie Jacquard. He was a French weaver and merchant that married the loom with the steam engine to create autonomous looms. And in those autonomous looms, he gained control. He could now make fabrics that were more complex and more sophisticated than the ones that they were able to do by hand. But also, by winning that industrial war, he laid out what has become the blueprint of automation.
Well, he also eliminated people's jobs and removed the handcrafted artistry that had previously gone into making those products. He increased productivity and reduced errors, certainly. But then, politics are not textiles.
The way that we automate things for the last 300 years has always been the same. We first identify a need, then we create a tool to satisfy that need, like the loom in this case, and then we study how people use that tool to automate that user. That's how we came from the mechanical loom to the autonomous loom, and that took us 1,000 years. Now, it's taking us only 100 years to use the same script to automate the car.
Yes, but that is all automating the production of physical goods. Politics and legislation are ideas and emotions and reactions to events and changes in society. How does removing the human element from politics then make any sense?
But I'm here to talk to you about another idea that might help us think about how to use artificial intelligence in democracy.
Artificial intelligence in democracy. Insert Skynet joke here.
Because the tools that I build are designed for executive decisions. These are decisions that can be cast in some sort of term of objectivity, public investment decisions. But there are decisions that are legislative. And these decisions that are legislative require communication among people that have different points of view, require participation, require debate, require deliberation. And for a long time, we have thought that, well, what we need to improve democracy is actually more communication. So all of the technologies that we have advanced in the context of democracy, whether they are newspapers or whether it is social media, have tried to provide us with more communication. But we've been down that rabbit hole, and we know that that's not what's going to solve the problem, because it's not a communication problem, it's a cognitive bandwidth problem. So if the problem is one of cognitive bandwidth, well, adding more communication to people is not going to be what's going to solve it.
Communication isn't the problem in politics. It's a cognitive bandwidth problem. So, how much of our independent thinking are we going to be turning over to machines then?
What we're going to need instead is to have other technologies that help us deal with some of the communication that we are overloaded with. Think of like a little avatar, a software agent, a digital Jiminy Cricket that basically is able to answer things on your behalf. And if we would have that technology, we'd be able to offload some of the communication and help maybe make better decisions or decisions at a larger scale. And the thing is that the idea of software agents also is not new. We already use them all the time. We use software agents to choose the way that we're going to drive to a certain location, the music that we're going to listen to, or to get suggestions for the next books that we should read.
So you're proposing a computer-assisted direct democracy, having software act as a filter, as an aggregator of information, so people can like or dislike legislation the same way they do Facebook posts? Is that what I am to understand? Well, I have many questions. Who do we trust to write the code for these apps? Whose worldview will be deciding how or how not to present information to the user? Without representation, who would be doing the research and writing the laws that are to be voted on? The individual voters? How would that not create even more legislative gridlock? Also, how secure can these apps be? How do you prevent against electronic ballot box stuffing? Oh, and by the way, you wouldn't happen to be currently developing such an app yourself, would you? And you wouldn't be using TEDx as a glorified elevator pitch, would you?
So there is an obvious idea in the 21st century that was as obvious as the idea of putting together a steam engine with a loom at the time of Jacquard. And that idea is combining direct democracy with software agents.
Well, I kinda already got that.
Imagine for a second a world in which instead of having a representative that represents you and millions of other people, you can have a representative that represents only you, with your nuanced political views, that weird combination of libertarian and liberal and maybe a little bit conservative on some issues and maybe very progressive on others.
Yes, but it wouldn't be wholly my view, would it? It would be my software-assisted view. Software I would be abrogating a portion of my own thinking to. Software written by someone else.
Politicians nowadays are packages and they're full of compromises. But you might have someone that can represent only you if you're willing to give up the idea that that representative is a human.
So it's still a representative democracy, except my representative is now software. Software created by humans. Humans I never elected, only whose product I happen to be using. Yeah, do you see where I'm going with this? Because I think I see where you are going with this.
If that representative is a software agent, we could have a Senate that has as many senators as we have citizens. And those senators are going to be able to read every bill, and they're going to be able to vote on each one of them. So there's an obvious idea that maybe we want to consider. But I understand that in this day and age, this idea might be quite scary.
Scary is one way of putting it, sure. Batshit crazy might be another way of putting it. But, okay, I'll give you a shot. Please allay my concerns about this idea.
In fact, thinking of a robot coming from the future to help us run our governments sounds terrifying. But we've been there before. And actually, he was quite a nice guy.
Ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha. What was I saying about Skynet again? Anyway, please do not tell me that a joke is your answer to the obvious problems inherent to your idea.
So, how would the Jacquard Loom version of this idea would look like? So it would be a very simple system. Imagine a system that you log in and you create your avatar, and then you're going to start training your avatar. So you can provide your avatar with your reading habits, or connect it to your social media, or you can connect it, to other data, for example, by taking psychological tests. And the nice thing about this is that there's no deception. You are not providing data to communicate with your friends and family that then gets used, in a political system. You are providing data to a system that is designed to be used to make political decisions on your behalf.
So my reading habits, my psychological profile, my voting preferences, none of this will be shared with friends and family. But it will be shared with a company who is running a server somewhere, who will have to retain every item of information on me in order that, when I vote, there is concrete verification that it is I who is casting that vote. And how secure is this data going to be? Who is going to assure that security? And when inevitably there is a data breach, and millions of voters' personal information is exposed, or leaked, or manipulated, how could you ever know that the voting process, from that point forward, is at all legitimate?
Then you take that data and you choose, a training algorithm, because it's an open marketplace in which different people can submit different algorithms to predict, how you're going to vote based on the data that you have provided. And the system is open, so nobody controls the algorithms. There are algorithms that become more popular, other ones that become less popular. And eventually you can audit the system. You can see how your avatar is working, and if you like it, you can leave it on autopilot. If you want to be a little bit more controlling, you can actually choose that they ask you every time that they're going to make a decision, or you can be anywhere in between.
Autopilot. So, you're not suggesting a software agent that just whittles things down for a user for ease of consumption. You're suggesting we put all of our trust into an algorithm to vote for us, whether we are paying attention to it or not. And there can be multiple algorithms in a marketplace. A marketplace where algorithms are created and managed by companies, to which we can all set our votes on autopilot. Got it.
One of the reasons why we use democracy so little may be because democracy has a very bad user interface. And if we improve the user interface of democracy, we might be able to use it more. Of course, there's a lot of questions that you might have.
Yes, any thinking person listening to you would have some. I have articulated mine, and I am dying to get some answers.
Well, how do you train these avatars? How do you keep the data secure? How do you keep the systems distributed and auditable? How about my grandma that is 80 years old and doesn't know how to use the internet? Trust me, I've heard them all. So when you think about an idea like this, you have to beware of pessimists because they're known to have a problem for every solution.
Pessimists. So, before you have even provided answers for the entirely reasonable questions and obvious concerns over your idea, you are defining reasonable questions and obvious concerns about your idea as pessimism. Doubt, in this instance, is thus defined as simply having a lousy attitude. So, people need to have a blind faith in your idea. Blind faith in an idea. You want cults? This is how we get cults, Pam.
So what I want to invite you is to think about the bigger ideas. The questions that I just showed you are little ideas because they're questions about how this would not work. The big ideas are ideas of what else can you do with this if this would happen to work.
Are you even listening to yourself? Do you have any idea how much you are coming off as a zealot right now?
And one of those ideas is, well, who writes the laws?
That is not an idea. That is a question. A very, very serious and relevant question. Please don't tell me that every voter can submit a piece of legislation for debate by the multitude of algorithms. Because if you're going to make every voter with an app and a keyboard possess equal legislative weight as everyone else with an app and a keyboard, as a glimpse into that future, might I introduce you to Tumblr?
In the beginning, we could have the avatars that we already have voting on laws that are written by the senators or politicians that we already have. But if this were to work, you could write an algorithm that could try to write a law that would get a certain percentage of approval, and you could reverse the process. Now, you might think that this idea is ludicrous and we should not do it.
Yes. Yes, I do. But
you cannot deny that it's an idea that is only possible in a world in which direct democracy and software agents are a viable form of participation.
But direct democracy is not a viable form of participation. You said so yourself. And software agents are also not a viable form of participation, because each step of the legislative and deliberative process that you take out of the hands of humans and put into the hands of algorithms, which are written by corporations and unseen programmers, they are not enhancements to liberty. They are the surrender of it.
So, how do we start a revolution?
I am dying to know.
And we don't start this revolution with picket fences or protest, or by demanding our current politicians to be changed into robots. That's not going to work. This is much more simpler, much slower, and much more humble. We started this revolution by creating simple systems like this in grad schools, in libraries, in non-profits, and we tried to figure out all of those little questions and those little problems that we're going to have to figure out to make this idea something viable, to make this idea something that we can trust. And as we create those systems that have 100 people, 1,000 people, 100,000 people voting in ways that are not politically binding, we're going to develop trust in this idea, the world is going to change, and those that are as little as my daughter is right now are going to grow up. And by the time that my daughter is my age, maybe this idea that I know is today very crazy might not be crazy to her and to her friends. And at that point, we will be at the end of our history, but they will be at the beginning of theirs. Thank you.
Okay, let us sum up here. Our speaker wants to seed this idea in small ways into less essential parts of society, in order to engender familiarity with the process, in order to build trust, in order to make it a normal part of our lives and, especially, normal to the children who will grow up and propagate this idea. Our speaker wants to indoctrinate people into handing over the power of their vote to corporate-run machines. That is our speaker's idea. An idea that, coincidentally enough, integrates quite nicely into our speaker's personal business interests as a developer of online tools and platforms that make use of personal, biographical, economic, and governmental data. But certainly, we can trust that our speaker isn't being driven by any kind of profit motive. Certainly, we can trust that his software, and the software of any other entity that might create digital representatives, have our best interests at heart. Certainly, we can trust them with our future. Don't think so? Well, stop being such a pessimist and believe. As always, thank you for watching.